Hi class, 4 things I want to cover in today's instructional video. First thing I want to do is I have some comments and I want to review the informative speech assignment. Then we're going to talk about the persuasive speech assignment. That's what you're working on right now. Also too, I have a few comments about final grades. We've got 4 weeks left in the semester. And so you want to make sure that you get all your work turned in if you haven't already. And just to give you an idea on how important that persuasive speech is in terms of determining your final grade in the class. And then some of you may have noticed in announcements for the class that I have given you a new extra credit opportunity, and I want to talk about that today. But first, let's go over the informative speeches. And by and large, really good group of presentations. And one of the things I really enjoy about the informative speeches, and we had some persuasive speeches mixed in there too as well, is I always learn something. That's really one of the cool things about teaching a class in public speaking is all that I learn from the students. Although I'm a little bummed because there was a really good persuasive speech on why we shouldn't eat avocados, and I love avocados, but after hearing that speech, I'm not enjoying them so much anymore. So even realize that you're having an impact on me in terms of the presentations that you're giving. So good job there by and large. And then too, I want to kind of explain, I'm kind of grading. You know that most of you got a complete on the informative speech, but also because we're getting to the end of the semester, and then at the end of the semester, I have to give you an actual letter grade. As I viewed each of the informative speeches, even if you're getting a complete, you're really going into one of 3 categories. I have the A category, the B category, and the C category. And to get what would be considered an A on the informative speech, and to get in that A category, you really needed to do 3 things. 1, your speech had to be organized and structured properly, and it had to be identical to the outline format that you were using for that particular speech. So the structure, real important. And when you're putting your speeches together, just use one of the sample outlines available. Like if you're doing an informative speech, use one of the sample outlines for an informative speech, and you want to constantly compare your outline to the sample outline to make sure it looks the same way in terms of the overall format. So you want to make sure that your outline looks just like the sample outline, either for the informative or the persuasive speech. So use the sample outlines, but structure real important, an important component, and one of the 3 requirements to get in that A category. The second one, you had to do your source citations properly. They had to be inserted correctly into the outline. You had to be able to cite your sources as I was listening to the actual speech, and you needed to have at least 4, and they needed to be complete with either name of the publication or website, the author, and the date that the information was published. So needed to have the source citations correct. And then to get in that A category, you also had to maintain eye contact with the audience, your viewers, i.e. you had to be giving your speech into the camera, and that eye contact had to at least be at 50%. So at least half the time, your eyes were on the camera. And that was the one thing that was kind of disappointing with a lot of the informative speeches. Some of you just didn't take the time to practice your speech between submitting the outline and then submitting the actual video. In fact, I had some of you submitted the outline and then the video on the same day. That just defeats the whole point, right? The big reason why I have you submit your outline before you give the speech is so you have time to practice. And if you haven't come to an understanding on the importance of practice, then you need to do so, and you need to do so in a hurry. Because really, that's the big difference between public speaking and effective public speaking, is to practice. And so ideally, once your outline is done, you want to spend a week practicing your speech. And a good way to do that, and I've been preaching this all semester, is you want to make sure that you're reading your speech out loud a minimum of 3 times a day, every day. And if you can do that for a week, you're going to have a really good grasp of your information without trying to memorize the information. Repetition is the key to retention. And again, your eye contact doesn't have to be at 100%, right? So I don't mind even if you're glancing down at your outline and then looking up and then speaking into the camera. That's fine. I just want eye contact on the camera, i.e. creating that impression or illusion of eye contact with the audience at least half the time. But I got some of you, it was like you're just ignoring the audience. And so when you're giving your presentation, instead of eyes on the camera, eyes are on the screen, right? And you can even kind of see the reflection of the outline in your eyes, and then you're just kind of reading the speech. All right, now for my next point, I'm going to focus on. There's no attempt to connect with the audience. Or a few of you had your outline off to the side, so now it looks like we're watching you give a speech to your imaginary friend. If you want to engage the audience and maintain the attention of the audience throughout your presentation, you have to look at them. It's the same thing in a conversation, right? When you're hanging out with your homies and having a conversation, you're not looking down here, you're not looking over here, you're looking at the person. It's the same thing with public speaking. And so to be considered a speech, you got to get that eye contact on the audience. For the informative speech, had to be there at least 50% of the time. But if you met all three, right? Speech is structured properly. You've got your source citations in the speech. They are cited properly during the flow of the presentation. And if you're looking at the audience at least 50% of the time, you're in that A category. If you missed one of the three, B category. If you missed two of the three, you're in the C category. So the reason why that's important is realize with this next upcoming speech, the persuasive speech, this really is the equivalent of your final exam. Now, we don't have a final exam in the class, but your last big opportunity to really demonstrate that you've mastered the art of public speaking, that you know how to give a presentation effectively, you've got to make sure that you're looking into the camera at least half the time. So with the persuasive speech coming up, and I'm going to use the persuasive speech, it's going to have a determining aspect on your final grade. So that last speech, the persuasive speech, and you do have one speech after that, the final assessment. That's just a short little speech. So the persuasive speech, your last big, what I call academic speech. If you want to get an A in this class for the semester, then that means when you present the video of your persuasive speech, you've got to make sure that you're looking into the camera, that you're maintaining eye contact with your audience, with your viewers, at least half the time. I promise you this, if I get another speech and I'm just watching somebody off to the side, just read their speech, maybe glance over, 2 or 3 times during the presentation, you're not going to get an A in this class because you haven't demonstrated, you've learned one of the most important techniques when it comes to public speaking. And I get that in reality, you're speaking alone in your room to a laptop, to a computer, or to your phone. But you still must create the impression that you're speaking directly to your viewers. And to do that, you've got to speak into the camera. And if you want to make it easy, right, you can just get a picture of someone, right? Maybe someone you really like or whatever, and put that picture right here above the camera. Or you can do what I do. I just have a little sign that says, look here, right? That reminds me. But you've got to make sure you're speaking into the camera. So find that camera. You've got to look there at least 50% of the time. And if you want to get an A in the class, make sure that that persuasive speech is organized and structured properly. And also, you're not going to get an A in the class for the semester unless you demonstrate you know how to incorporate source citations into a speech. So you must have a minimum of 4 sources of evidence cited properly in the speech, 1 in the significant step and at least 1 in each of your 3 main points. So realize this persuasive speech has a big impact on your overall final grade. It's very similar to having a final exam. And also realize you get to negotiate for your final grade. That last assignment, the final assessment, you'll actually turn in, right? Here's what my grade should be, and here's why. And a big argument that you want to make is you want to remember your 3 goals that you established at the start of the semester, and you want to be able to demonstrate how you've met those 3 goals. And also, you've got to meet my student learning objectives as well. I've got to make sure you know how to structure speech properly. That includes incorporating the source citations, and that you know how to deliver a speech properly by looking into the camera if you're speaking remotely. So make sure you understand that. Do a really good job on that final persuasive speech, that last big academic presentation. That will have a big impact on your overall grade. And that's cool, especially for those of you that really struggled at the start of the semester, but you've been improving. Now, nail that last big speech, and I think you have a pretty good case for arguing that you should get an A in the class for the semester. But if you're just reading your speech, you're not going to get an A in the class. So I want to make sure that you understand that. And so what that means is you've got to do the work, you've got to put in the practice in between submitting your outline and submitting your video for the presentation. Okay? All right. And then last thing today, extra credit opportunity. I just posted that on your Canvas shell under announcements. But at the end of this week, starting on Thursday, I think it was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the Solano Community College Theater is putting on a performance of You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. It'll be live streamed, and you can get all the information on the live stream in the video that I posted. But watch the live stream, and then essentially you're going to give a critic speech on the performance of You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. So that means you'll use the outline format that you use for the critic speech. That means that your speech should have an introduction, and in that introduction, you're grabbing the attention of the audience. Also, too, make sure from here on out, anytime you begin a speech, you always start with the attention getter, right? I don't need to know who you are and the topic of your speech and then go into the attention getter. That defeats the whole point of having an attention getter. So make sure when you begin your presentation, you are starting with the actual attention getter. Tell us the topic. The topic will be the same. You're all doing it on You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. Give us your thesis, your overall opinion of the play, and then preview your 2 main points, which will be a brief description of the play, followed by your evaluation. You want to do that in the body of the speech. Make sure that you have a nice, clean transition that goes from the end of the description into the evaluation, and then you should have a conclusion where you summarize your 2 main points, tie it back into your thesis, and then end your speech with a strong sense of finality. A good way to do that is to refer back to your opening attention getter. So, big extra credit opportunity. Watch the live stream. Record yourself giving a video review of the performance, and then submit that. And that extra credit, if you missed a speech or an assignment, cool, we can use that as a replacement. If you haven't missed any assignments and you do the extra credit, I think that really strengthens your argument and your ability to negotiate that you deserve an A in the class. So that extra credit opportunity is there. I'm going to try to see if I can get a copy of the live stream. I'm not sure if I'll be able to do that just because of copyright laws, but I will try to do that. But to ensure that you get the extra credit, you want to make sure that you're actually watching one of the live webcasts. And again, I just posted an announcement with all of the pertinent information for completing that extra credit opportunity. In fact, let's go ahead and go to the modules now. Let me show you exactly where you can find that extra credit assignment and where you can submit your extra credit video. Let's go ahead and go to the modules now. Okay, so we're on the modules now. Let's go ahead and scroll down. Also, too, Notice after week 2, here's where all the Zoom recordings are. And I know, I guess I'm kind of preaching to the choir, but the views aren't that high. And so that tells me that a lot of you aren't watching the Zoom recordings, and that explains why some of you are having so much trouble with your assignments and not really understanding all of the requirements of an assignment, is because you're not watching the Zoom recordings. Look, I give instructions for all kinds of things that you've been doing in this class, and you really can't master and get an A in the class unless you're getting all the information. So you've got to make sure that you're watching the Zoom recordings. Anyway, here's where they are housed. They're the 3rd module down. All right, but let's keep scrolling. We're going to go all the way down to the very bottom. That's where we're going to find the extra credit assignment. And so right here, submitting the extra credit assignment, you just have to click on here and then submit the video. Remember, you're following the critic speech outline format, but don't have to turn an outline in 2 to 5 minute video recording where you are giving your video review on the play, the performance, You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. All right, one last thing I want to show you on the modules. Let's just go up to this week's module on the persuasive speech. And most of you have got the outlining down, but some of you are still struggling, and that kind of tells me maybe you aren't finding all the sample outlines, because a real easy way to ensure that your speech is structured correctly is just to compare your outline to one of the sample outlines. And so here, if you look at the persuasive speech module, right here, behavioral persuasive sample speech outline. And so if you're doing a behavioral persuasive speech, you want to make sure that you go to this module and that you're using the sample outline as a guide. I mean, if you want to ensure that your outline is done correctly and you're doing a behavioral persuasive speech, and again, behavioral persuasive speech, 3 main points are already assigned. You're going to talk about the effects of the problem, all the bad things, the consequences that tell us that stuff's jacked up. 2, the causes, the reasons why the problem exists. And you want to give us solutions, things that we as the audience members can apply to help fight against the particular problem that you're addressing in your speech. But you've got a sample outline here. Those of you that are still struggling with your source citations, look, use the sample outline that shows you exactly how to weave your source citations into the actual outline. And you see that the source citations are all complete. You've got the name of the publication or the title of the website, the date, and you have an author. So use the sample outline. So if you're doing the behavioral speech as your persuasive speech, then you want to make sure that you go to the behavioral persuasive sample speech outline and use that as a guide when you're putting your speech together. And then if you're doing an attitudinal persuasive speech, again, let's go to the modules, scroll down to the persuasive assignment, and then here on the persuasive speech module, if you're doing an attitudinal persuasive speech, you've got the sample outline right here. So make sure that you're using the sample outlines. That should ensure that your outline is done correctly. And remember, on this last big speech assignment, the persuasive speech, if you really want to set yourself up for getting an A in the class, you've got to make sure that your speech is structured properly, that your outline is formatted correctly. And one of the best ways to ensure that you do that is to make sure that you're using the sample outlines available to you when you're putting your speech together. All right, class, and then last thing today, several of you have been standing when you've been giving your presentations, which is really good. I like to see that. That's more of a traditional way to give a speech, and that would be exactly the way that we would be delivering speeches if we were in the classroom. So what I'm going to do to end off today's instructional video, I'm going to attach a lecture I did a couple weeks ago on how to establish and maintain a proper speaking stance when standing and giving a presentation. So you can take a look at that now. Have a good week, folks. Work hard on those persuasive speeches. All right. Talk to you later. And remember, need any help, just break me off an email. All right. When it comes to delivering a speech, one of the first things that you want to understand is the importance of establishing a proper stance. And the reason why that's important is kind of the basic rule with movement in a speech, as far as standing or moving around, is movement is okay if your movement is purposeful. And a little bit later, we'll talk about a good time to actually move or walk during a speech, but you want your movement to be purposeful. What we want to do here is we want to eliminate any kind of random or constant motion, because that can create a distraction during the speech. So one of the first things you want to do anytime that you give a speech, even before you open your mouth and deliver that first opening line, is to make sure that you establish a proper stance. If we were meeting in the classroom on the very first day of class, this would be the first thing that I would teach you, how to set a proper stance. So a good speaking stance begins with, you want to make sure that your feet are the same width as your shoulders. That gives you a nice balanced stance. You don't want your feet together. It's a little bit harder to control the motion. And if your stance gets a little wide, it just looks a little awkward. And notice if I kind of widen my stance, I kind of shrink my height a little bit. And we know when it comes to public speaking, the taller you are, the easier it is to command the attention of the audience. Now, we're kind of stuck with however tall we are, but what we want to do is we want to make sure that we maximize our height as a speaker. The best way to do that is to make sure that your feet, same width as your shoulders. Second thing, and this is so important, this will really control a lot of the random movement, constant movement that we get in a speech, and that would be, once you set your stance, feet, same width as your shoulders, you want to make sure that you balance your weight evenly on each leg. So you're nice and balanced. The common mistake that some speakers make, they'll get up to begin a presentation, but they kind of have all their weight on one leg. And then what will happen about a minute or so into the speech, one of two things will happen. Either the person will shift the weight to the other leg and we start getting kind of this swaying motion, or if you never shift your weight, your leg's going to fall asleep and you're going to fall over. So typically what happens, if you don't have your weight evenly balanced, you're just setting yourself up to create this constant swaying during the overall speech. So to prevent that, make sure that your weight is evenly balanced on each leg. And then the third thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that you sink your weight back into your heels. This is what we call sitting down in your stance. And one of the reasons why you want that weight towards the back, you want it into your heels, most of us, when we're giving a presentation, we've got that little extra rush of energy and adrenaline. And if we really don't sink our stance back into our heels, then we kind of get up on the balls of our feet, right? And then we kind of get that bouncy motion right there. Any of you ever been to a Pentecostal church? You see the preacher, and I say unto you, right? That's because all the weight is forward. That creates a distraction. So you want to make sure that you sink your weight back into your heels. So when it comes to public speaking, it all begins by establishing your stance first. And you want to set your stance and establish your presence as a speaker even before you say that opening line. And so really, if you want to have the maximum opportunity to really grab the attention of the audience and to pull them into the presentation, you'll begin your speech with the set attention getter. But before you begin with that attention getter, you want to make sure that you establish your stance. And then I always tell students, even before you say that opening line, you want to get eye contact with two students. So it's kind of like bam, bam. Then I'll look at the third audience member. As I look at that audience member, then I begin with my set attention getter. And when it comes to public speaking, always begin with your set attention getter. You don't want to get up and begin a speech with what I call meta communication. That's just kind of the random info. Hey everybody, how you doing? Okay, I'm going to get into my speech now. Okay, Mr. Falk, you ready? Okay, cool. As I was walking through no, that's just a distraction. You want to make sure so you can really grab the attention of the audience when you're called on to speak and you stand. You come on up in front of the audience, set that stance. As I was walking through the streets of China one day, I came upon, and now you're into the presentation. So if you really want to speak like a pro, it all begins with establishing a proper stance when you're standing to give a presentation.